Okay, welcome to MMT 101, where we learn about economics based on observing the real mechanics of the monetary system. And of course that is rather than with orthodox economics based on theoretical models, often based on unrealistic assumptions. Today I'm chatting to my favourite economist and one of my favourite people, and that's post-Keynesian and institutionalist economist John T. Harvey. John is Professor of Economics at Texas Christian University. He's the editor of the World Economic Review, and he's the author of several books, including Currencies, Capital Flows and Crisis, and Contending Perspectives in Economics. He writes the Pragmatic Economics blog at Forbes, as well as hosting a YouTube channel called The Cowboy Economist, which takes a different approach to educating people about how the economy works. The Cowboy Economist dispenses folksy wisdom on contemporary economic issues. Okay, on this episode of the MMT 101 podcast, I'm chatting to John about his new book, which is called US Business Cycles 1954 to 2020, in which he uncovers the levers driving our boom and bust cycles, as well as offering solutions to temper the effects of those down cycles, those recessions as we normally call them. As far as I'm concerned, John's book is one of the best economics books I've ever read. It's incredibly easy to read. Although it packs in a massive amount of information, it doesn't feel like a long book. You can get the sections feel quite short, and you'll learn an awful lot in each section. Just to give you a quick summary of his book. Well, I don't need to actually, because we talk about this when I chat to John. But I would say I would recommend John's book. It's an absolute cracker. You'll find it, as I say, easy to read, and you'll learn an awful lot about the economy. Okay, before we start, if you don't mind, could you do me a favour? If you would like to support my ability to continue to write and podcast about MMT, please become a paid subscriber. This is the only thing I'm doing now, and it does not earn enough for me to make a living at it. And I would quite like to continue to do it. I think it's a good idea. Why do I think it's a good idea? Because if we don't, we're all doomed. That's what I think. It's not only me that thinks that. The scientists think that. Understanding that only currency issuing governments have the capacity to fund the mitigation required to save ourselves from being burnt to a crisp due to climate change is probably a good reason for teaching people about MMT. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. So without further ado, let's chat with John T. Harvey. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
The MMT 101 podcast. It's great to have you on. And we're going to be talking about your latest book, which I've written the title down because otherwise I would forget. I mean, and that's no slur on you. I just forget.
I brought a copy with me so I wouldn't forget.
Yeah. So it's Business Cycles 1954 to 2020. And as I was saying before we come on air, I think it's an absolutely fantastic book for anybody.
Thank you.
Anybody out there interested in economics, specifically interested in macroeconomics, then it's a must read. And it's a great book. And it's a great book. It's easy to read. It's got lots of information on it, and there's lots of what I thought were quite new perspectives on.
Thank you.
You know, there's kind of, for me anyway, there's kind of three sections. There's your business cycle section. There's your inflation section, and there's your job guarantee section.
Yes.
Maybe you don't see it that way because you've been.
No, actually I do. I will go over the sections because to some extent I think they stand independently.
Yeah.
You don't have to read them in that order.
And each of them, have got lots of interesting and new things to say. So I thought maybe we could talk about, start by you telling us a little bit about the genesis of the idea for the book.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Jim. I've really been looking forward to this. Yeah, the book has just come out, December 2025, Cambridge University Press. I will point out quickly, U.S. business cycles 1954 to 2020. Why 1954 to 2020? Why not 1954 to 2025? It's supposed to be covering every recession we've had since 1954. I started 1954 because that was the first year I could get all the data that I wanted to have highlighted in each chapter. 1954 was the first year that was complete. And then to this point, 2020 is still our last recession. So it goes up through the last recession. At some point, obviously, I'll have to do a new chapter or extension of that chapter, but that's what it was there for. I've been told a couple of times that I have the wrong title, that it shouldn't be called U.S. business cycles, because really that's just one chapter, and that most of it is theory and policy. And that's true, but let me back up to why I wrote it, and then I'll tell you why that particular chapter ended up taking the title of the book rather than rather than the theory of business cycles or something like that. I have been interested in business cycles even before I was an economics major. I love military history. And most of my military history, World War II, most of my stories that I heard growing up were all from the English side of my family, who are really Irish. But anyway, the English side of the family. They were in London during the Battle of Britain, during the Blitz, and my granddad was a fireman, and so I have a great uncle who's buried in North Africa, still to this day, who was in the I don't know if he's in the Eighth Army, but he was Royal Army Ordnance Corps. And so I found all this fascinating, as a little kid would. And there are a lot of little kids that were into World War II, at my age. But as you got past the battles and so forth, and you start thinking about the social conditions, and then realizing what a big role the Great Depression played in setting the stage for Hitler's rise to power, and for Mussolini and for Tojo and so forth, that was very interesting to me. But what was especially interesting was that the Great Depression was preceded by the Roaring Twenties, by this massive economic expansion. And so think about this for a minute, because you mentioned before we came on air that there were some things in the books that were surprising. They were surprising to me too, because it took me a long time to figure them out, because and they're surprising in the sense that they don't fit the typical narrative that we hear. So one of the things that we sort of come to take for granted is that, well, recessions happen. So yeah, it was kind of strange that the Great Depression happens after the Roaring Twenties. But stop for a minute and think to yourself, why should it? Why shouldn't the Roaring Twenties have led to a 1930s that was the most pleasant period of economic history, at least for the West, to live in? There was a massive increase in technology. There was a massive increase in the construction of physical capital, which is used to produce output. The 30s should have been incredible. I used to tell a story to my students. It's like, okay, imagine this. You're an alien who came to visit the Earth, and you disguised yourself surgically to look like a human, and you showed up here in the 20s. And you're like, wow, this is awesome. All the drinking and dancing and partying. I'm going to talk my friends into coming with me. So they go back to their home planet, and they talk their friends into coming back in 1935. You're like, what the hell? What's going on here?
Yeah.
Well, you tricked us. It's like, no, it was awesome. There's no logical reason that should have happened except the system created it. The system we've got created it. The system caused the increasing technology to be a bad thing. Now, let me very quickly explain the whole book. Given that I just said that, there's a section in chapter 5, and I'll talk about the setup of the book in a moment, where I say, labor-saving technology should be a wonderful thing. When we get a dishwasher, a washing machine, a dryer, running water in the house, this creates extra leisure time, extra socialization time for the household. But when we replace a worker at McDonald's, or let's say 3 or 4 workers at McDonald's, with a little ordering kiosk thing, this is not a good thing. This ends up causing them, even though we can still make as many hamburgers as we could before. It's not like our ability to produce hamburgers went down, or oh no, there's a cattle shortage, or whatever they make their hamburgers out of. Then that person's in trouble, because the difference is in the household. Little Jimmy, who used to wash the dishes by hand after dinner every day, is not unemployed now that they have a dishwasher. Jimmy's right to share in the meal is because Jimmy is a member of the family, and that's it. That's not the way it works in capitalism. In capitalism, you must be able to have somebody believe that hiring you will be profitable to them. Now, there are sectors where that works quite well. But in general, the massive increase in technology, the massive increase in capital expenditures through the 1920s, which drove that expansion and should have left us in a situation where, now we have, if we want to use the analogy here for the household, now we have running water. So mom isn't spending half her day going to get water. Now we have a washer and a dryer and a dishwasher. That should be a wonderful situation. But instead, if you want to use the analogy this way, we've put little Jimmy out of a job. We've put little Susie out of a job. Mom's only working part-time now. They're all going hungry, even though our ability to manage the household has gone up. So that is the basic problem, all right, that in a nutshell. Now, the book has a first chapter, pretty short one, where it says, this is what's wrong with orthodox economics today. Yeah. They basically ignore, I shouldn't say ignore, that they don't believe that recessions are built into the system. They believe that they are caused by external shocks. So are recessions sometimes caused by an external shock? Of course they are. COVID was an excellent example. So the first chapter is just talking about what's wrong in mainstream economics, which they often admit themselves, but then don't do anything about. Chapter 2 is the theory of the business cycle. Basically a little bit more, but not terribly complicated. I wrote this book aiming it at the layperson, the interested layperson, and lots of MMT people out there that don't have any formal background, which is why they haven't already had their mind contaminated by another view, which is lucky. But this is trying to insert a view that is consistent with MMT about the way the business cycle works. So that's chapter 2. The theory of the business cycle. Chapter 3, I'll go into some other associated issues, especially inflation, which we'll talk about later, so I won't say too much about that, but especially inflation because it's so poorly understood. Stock market, maybe income distribution. I can't remember what else I did in this chapter. Chapter 4 is U.S. business cycles 1954 to 2020, and that is the most unique part of the volume. I obviously drew from other sources for all these other ideas that I had for the policy, for the theory. But the part that was brand new and nobody had ever done before was, now let's actually have a history of the United States economy from 1954 to 2020 in the framework that I've just set up. And then, once you do that, then the reader is left with, well, what can we do about this? And that's chapter 5. And chapter 5 is all the MMT and job guarantee stuff, which very kindly Randy Ray read for me and Pavlina Cherneva read for me to catch any mistake. And there were several things I had to correct after they checked it out for me. And then if you do love math, then there's an appendix with here's Keynes's theory, here's Kalecki's, and so forth. So that's the structure of the book, and where I was aiming it and why I wrote it. I really, really wanted to understand business cycles because I thought it was so interesting that the Roaring '20s had led to the Great Depression.
Yep. No, I mean, as I was saying before, it's a great book, and that is, clearly that's a good summary. John, you wrote the book, you know about it. I mean, I found it fascinating. There's some things in it that are kind of, I suppose they're about people as much as anything else. Which is, that bit at the start where you talk about your grandmother and you talk about Hitler and the war and the reparations of the war. And some of these things, people's actions kind of caused the depression, because Germany was put in such a situation that
yes, Treaty of Versailles, and that obviously made things even worse.
Citizens were having a hard time of it,
right,
and Hitler was offering a solution. So there's sort of stuff about people there, and then of course there's the stuff about people within the mainstream economics and their thoughts about. I mean, almost like a denial. That there was such a thing as a business cycle, because it was just too hard to fit into the things that were commonly being discussed and the framework.
If I may interject right there, an example, which I brought up at the conference in Edinburgh, so you probably already heard this, but an example of mainstream economics ignoring a serious problem because it's difficult to take it into account using their modeling technique. We had a gentleman come to our department some months ago now to talk about the impact of AI on employment. Well, okay, that sounds like a really important topic. He assumed away unemployment.
Yeah.
He just assumed it away because he literally said that, well, that would cause a lot of problems with the math and so forth. I said, well, that's too bad because that's the one thing that people are really worried about. And my neoclassical colleagues, when I brought it up to them afterwards, they were like, oh yeah, I guess he did assume that away. Well, but that's a complicated problem. But it's the problem. All right. So anyway, yeah, we have come to where, and remember, you always have to think too, there's a self-selection process. People who go to get a PhD in economics and don't think this makes any sense, don't finish the PhD. The people who are okay with assuming away unemployment are the ones that finish the PhD, and they're the ones that are now in charge of our journals and so forth. So anyway, yeah.
Well, there's an interesting solution that you mentioned in your book, which is this idea that some of these economists, they simply can't accommodate notions of there being a business cycle, or even the sorts of notions that MMT are talking about as well. And therefore, what is the solution? Let's get rid of macroeconomics as an academic subject. I thought that was a particularly remarkable solution to that problem. Yeah. Let's not teach it. That's a great idea. Because then we won't have that stress.
Except in my class. We should teach it in my class. So,
But it just seems it kind of sums up the absurdity of a system which is so closed and so difficult to break out of that you've got this framework that they've got, this mathematical thing where internal logics, all adds up, but it can't accommodate the real world.
No, that's right. Yeah.
If we can't accommodate the real world, let's just ignore the real world because.
Yes, I mean Keynes made that same argument in 1936. He's like, the economists are well, the whole thing about in the long run we're all dead. I don't think many people understand the context of that statement. What he was saying was that mainstream economics was like, well, let's ignore these short-term fluctuations like the Great Depression because in the long run it'll all be okay. And he's like, no. That's not true because he says in the long run, we're all dead. If you tell me during tempestuous seasons that the ocean will again be flat at some point, that doesn't help me navigate the storm. I might not still be on the surface of the water by the time the storm is over. So the storm's not going to be here forever, but but we as economists have an obligation to explain the storm and not say, that's a bit complicated. So. It'll go away. Imagine if meteorology worked that way. If meteorology was like, we're just going to focus on bright, sunny, warm days, because there will be some. And then we're going to create this entire mythology that's the natural state of the world is a bright, sunny, warm day. And the world always goes back to that. And then they will point to those individual days that did look like that as evidence that they were right.
Yeah, and those are just anomalies.
Yeah. And then how much good does that do us when we're going to take our boat out on the Irish Sea? Not much. So
that's true.
It's very frustrating.
But luckily, people like yourself come along. Harvey, he came along and he said, actually, I can see that there are such a thing as business cycles. Not only can I see that there are such a thing as business cycles, but I can see why there are business cycles. It's actually an inherent part of the system. And human nature's in there as well, of course.
Yes, absolutely.
That people get excited about growth and they invest. I'm not going to tell your story, John. But
no, that's fine.
But so maybe you could tell me from there, what is the thing about this business cycle thing? Where's that come from? What's that about?
Right. So I gave you kind of an analogy with the household, but now let me give you the economic version of that. Let's say we're in very early expansion. All right. And see, how am I going to work that in? Well, let's just start there. Very early expansion. Entrepreneurs are, so what we need are injections into the income stream that aren't dependent on people's current level of income. If they're dependent on the current level of income, then we're just going to get what we've got. We can only recreate the current state of the economy. It explains this a little bit more subtly in the book. If we only have consumption investment doesn't, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used the word investment. Consumption spending really doesn't drive the level of the economy. Consumption tends to be a result of the fact that there's an expansion or recession. It doesn't cause an expansion or recession. It can do. There are some individual historical situations, but generally speaking, it doesn't. What really drives economic activity is physical investment spending, like building restaurants, government deficits, which I don't really talk about till later in the book, but because I just want to sort of build the case without the government and then put it in later. And exports. So, for the U.S., exports is not a big factor. So let's go to the investment then. Let's assume away the government debt and deficit. Let's say they always have a balanced budget just to start things off. And it's early expansion. We've just come out of a recession. Firms are becoming a little bit more optimistic that, that the expansion or the recession has been going on for a couple of years now. And well, surely this won't go on forever. But the real important factor is that during the recession, the firms will not have replaced capital that wears out. Like imagine you run a grocery store and you have 5 registers. And during the recession, one of the registers breaks. Well, okay, we're going to run with 4 registers. I mean, we're not that busy anyway, and that's a big expense. And then another one breaks. Okay, we're going to run with 3. But you can't do that forever. And you also start to think to yourself, okay, well, the recession was a while, things are going to. So early in expansion, as things start to take off, as firms are replacing old, worn-out capital, this comes as a pleasant surprise to the entrepreneur that their spending, and this gets into Michael Koleski's stuff, their spending on investment also creates profits. Now, there's an easy way to explain this, and there's the hard way. The hard way is really fun if I have a chalkboard, but we'll do the easy way. When these firms are building new restaurants or replacing the worn-out registers and so forth, they are creating new income for construction workers, for those who produce these, cash registers, whatever. So, and this becomes profit. These people go out and spend this money, becomes profit. So so Koleski makes the point that investment and profit are highly correlated. When entrepreneurs invest, they create profits. Now, not for themselves individually, but for the class of people. You might make a really bad investment and do poorly from it, but you did make the investment, you created the income, you created profits for your class of people. So, economy starts to take off. Now, one of the important backgrounds to all this, and probably the most important background for Keynes, was the idea that people operate in an environment of uncertainty. And he had such a difficult time with mainstream economics and was never successful in convincing them. Because, so why does an entrepreneur buy a new cash register? Because they expect to profit from it. All right, that's why. That's the trigger that I believe that it's going to cost me X amount of money to buy the cash register and operate it, but I'm going to earn X plus Y. I'm going to get the Y is going to be the profit part. So I have to forecast that. So forecasting is extremely important. Expectations are extremely important in driving the investment that drives the rest of the economy. Now, neoclassical economics operated on the assumption, and still does, that even if either they model the entrepreneur as having perfect foresight, to where they know exactly how much they're going to make, or they have sort of a quantitative perfect, I don't know exactly, but on average, I know exactly right. For example, if you're rolling 2 dice over and over and over, then the most common outcome is a 7. 7 comes up 6 times out of 36 possibilities. So as I'm rolling the dice, if I guess 7 every time, I'm not going to be right every time, but I'm going to be right on average. So that's the way the neoclassicals tend to, frame the investment decision. Keynes is like, this is where you're way off. We never have enough information to come up with a mathematically reliable forecast. And he even says it's really sad to read some of these articles he wrote after he wrote the general theory, because he's like, look, listen to me for God's sake. He says in one of the articles, look, I'm sure you think I'm making a big deal out of nothing, but you have to understand how people behave differently when they don't have this mathematical certainty that we have from rolling 2 dice. I mean, when would you predict something other than 7? Never. You would always predict 7 rolling 2 dice. You would never say to yourself, oh gosh, I shouldn't have predicted 7. You would say, oh, I got unlucky. But 7 was still the right choice. And so this is where neoclassical economics is coming from, that the entrepreneur never panics and thinks to themselves, wow, the entire foundation of my forecast, really, honestly, that was kind of a gut feeling. It really wasn't that much solid information. Keynes said that is absolutely vital to understanding how spending changes over the course of the business cycle. So early on in this environment of uncertainty, when we have these unexpectedly high profits, we're like, oh, well, this is great. All right. So, and then through the mid expansion, their positive expectations are met by positive outcomes. They're very happy. But here's the key and the payoff for all that painful stuff the listeners just had to listen to and me trying to lay out all of Keynes's general theory in a few sentences. At the top of the business cycle, you're finishing building your new restaurant. You're finishing putting in your cash register. I mean, how much money does an entrepreneur make from building a restaurant? Absolutely nothing. They only make the money when they open the door. Mm-hmm. On top of that, they're now in debt, and probably in a lot of debt. Mm-hmm. So they really want those doors to open. Now, if you look up on the internet and say, what causes recessions? A very common answer is that people get pessimistic. No, the opposite. At the top of the business cycle, these firms are still thinking, hey, things are going along great, because they were for a while. They were right for a while. But now the spending is going down, and there's starting to be a gap between what they expected and what they got. And if that gap is big enough, at the very least, it's going to cause a slowdown, and it could actually cause panic. So at the top of the business cycle, and this is what I look for in the book, I look for at the end of this particular cycle where expectations still very optimistic, but at the same time, profits were falling. And this happens 7 out of 10 times in the recessions I looked at. 3 of them were clearly caused by an external factor: COVID, the 1973 OPEC oil embargo, and I've forgotten the other one, John. Anyway, whatever the other one was now. I did write the book, so I did know at one point, but I've now totally forgotten what the third one was. So that in a nutshell is the, and so the problem is we end up being punished for the fact that we can build restaurants pretty quickly. Yeah. If it took a long time. Now, Keynes then says in the general theory, when he covers this, he says, you're probably, so I'm sitting there reading it first time as a graduate student, and I'm thinking, oh, so we need to slow down the expansion so that we don't end up with the recession. And then the next sentence from Keynes is, but the last thing we'd want to do is slow down the expansion. Why? And then it hits you. It's like, oh yeah, we don't have to take the system for granted. It's the system that's screwing us. It's not our physical ability to produce goods and services. That's working okay. But it's the fact that the system then punishes us for being able to produce more with fewer people. And this happens over the long run, and it happens cyclically, where we have this issue arising. So, and then that's when we get to the job guarantee. After that, so okay, well, how do we fix this? Well, private sector can't provide enough jobs for everyone.
Yeah, no, I find honestly, I didn't have that story in my head. That's not something I had thought. Well, I understand business cycles. I don't. So I found it quite interesting, just kind of the way you unlocked it with the story of, the expansion and the increased capacity. And then there's that kind of inflection point when people start thinking, oh, right, wait a minute, we've expanded too fast. Or we've expanded just enough. Or, yeah, well, whatever. And that's the thing. Yeah, we've expanded just enough. Yeah. So it's not even that we think we've made a mistake. Yeah. We think, okay, this is good. We've got the 3 new restaurants we thought would be profitable here in Glasgow. Yeah. And so now let's stop. Now, as long as everyone else is still building, your restaurants are going to be profitable. Right. When enough, Koleski talked about this in the 1930s, that, when enough of your colleagues have also reached the same point, now that's when it comes back down. But not because you made a mistake. The Austrians will argue, for example, that firms over-invested. They invested in more than could actually be profitable. Yeah. Keynes takes pains to point out, I don't mean they produce too much. We typically don't produce enough because we hit that inflection point before we actually get to the point where, but the problem is we're so dependent on all those construction workers, the suppliers, and so forth. So. Yeah, that was the thing I was going to say. Not that you can expect me to completely understand, John, but that was the kind of thing I was thinking of. I had the kind of story in my head, which is once you get to the point where you've got this amount of capacity and you've stopped investing, because you built your restaurants.
Right.
You no longer need those construction workers.
Right.
You bought your cash register.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
everybody bought them all at the same time because they all thought at the
Yeah.
end of the recession, oh, finally we need to fix some things. So
Right.
there is that bit where things are going up and things are growing. But then the suppliers and the builders, they suddenly find that they've no more work to go because they build those things.
Right.
And
That's
those
right.
workers are perhaps let off, given
Yeah.
redundancy at the construction, and that means they've got less money in their pocket,
Yeah.
and less money to spend on in the restaurant.
Right. That's right. That's right.
So
It's something I learned from Koleski that had never crossed my mind. Was that let's split the entire economy into two sectors. The firms that produce investment goods, like they build factories, they build restaurants, and the firms that produce consumer goods, the things that they sell to us. And the first time I was reading one of Pavlina Chernov's articles, because I always wanted people I admired liked Koleski. And I was like, well, I should learn some Koleski. So anyway, I was reading one of her articles from the Levy Institute and was going to assign it in class. That way it would force me to learn it so well that I could teach it. And I'm reading in there, and he's talking about the fact that profit only comes from the investment goods sector. It can't come from the consumption goods sector. And I was like, this makes no sense to me. And I finally worked it out. What if every consumption goods firm is just Walmart? Right? Walmart can't possibly make a profit by only selling to its own workers. All it's getting back is its own money that it's spent on salary. And ultimately, all income is either wages or profits. Those are the only two places. We don't actually pay coal anything. Coal doesn't get any money. It all goes to people or organizations, right? So it's all profit or wages. Well, Walmart cannot profit by only selling to its own workers because it's only getting its own money back. There must be an injection from another firm, from another sector, and the other sector's investment. And I was like, wow, I had never seen it that. I sure didn't learn that in graduate school. I just filled out for the Association for Evolutionary Economics. They do a member spotlight every so many months, and they asked me if I would do one. And what was your experience like at University of Tennessee, which was full of institutionalists. But my graduate, and then they asked in there, I went there undergraduate and graduate, and they asked, what was your graduate school experience like? And I typed this sentence several times and said, no, I need to leave it like that. I said, it was a disappointment. It was a big disappointment in graduate school because it wasn't the institutionalists teaching the theory classes, teaching the core micro and macro. It was the neoclassicals. And I was like, we literally learned in class that the Great Depression, unemployment in the Great Depression was voluntary because workers voluntarily quit their jobs, not realizing, even though there's no, social safety net to speak of in the 1930s, they quit their jobs because, let's see now, this goes to the Friedman stuff we've been talking about before we came on the air. Friedman says, the money supply came down, which meant prices came down, which meant firms couldn't pay as much anymore. So if you do the math, the way this model worked, the workers were actually getting paid more in purchasing power, but less in the dollars on the paycheck. So they quit their jobs. Like, this is stupid. There is no way that, and then you find out that Friedman also says, well, it doesn't matter how realistic the model is as long as it predicts well. And the money supply did fall and unemployment did go up. So I'm going to make up a story that connects them. But then you have no way of figuring out how to solve the problem because that story was just made up.
Well, that's one of those big things that I keep mentioning in my own writing, are the assumptions that orthodox and neoliberal economics are based on, which are both ideological and absurd, and have no basis, many of them either, and they're based on human nature, which they've made up.
Right. But when they colonize, they will colonize other disciplines. Hey, psychology, we know how people really work, and so then they'll go in and rather than, there's something we can learn from psychology.
Yeah, and some of these assumptions which pop into my head every now and again from what I've read in the past, which I always find fascinating. One of them is this idea that the worker understands the economy, understands how the economy works, understands his or her place in the economy,
Right.
understands the assumptions about wages and productivity and inflation, and then predicts, well, actually, I should quit my job.
Yeah.
Because I
No,
could
that's something else I learned in graduate school. And you mentioned the ideological part of it, and it's interesting that most economists would count themselves as political liberals, even though I mean I guess maybe they would be sort of what do you call it? Establishment Democrats over here, but we love the market. But we want, rights for gay people and poor people to have support. But we love the market, right? So they view themselves mostly as political liberals. But you're right. A lot of these stories, when you think about why, since we have an infinite number of wrong assumptions about the way the world works, why did you pick those? And those wrong assumptions tend to support the idea, ooh, government's bad, private sector good. And so this is going to attract a certain type of person to graduate school and to finish up the program, so that even if they count themselves as like Paul Krugman, as political liberals, they're using a framework to explain the way the world works that's never going to get them to what they want the world to look like. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. So I don't know how they battle this. Now, having said that, I mean, there are people, I'm picking especially on macroeconomics here in the mainstream. There are people who do interesting work. I have a colleague that has all kinds of stuff he's done on abortion rights. Now, and using sort of economic models to talk about this, and very much in favor of there being abortion rights and so forth. So, but macro is what I loved. And macro and exchange rates. And exchange rates are horrifically done too. That's my next book, by the way. I wrote a book in 2009 on exchange rates, and a lot of really good stuff has been done since then. And I'd like to, as my last act, I'm 65 now, and I figure by the time I'm 70, I want that last book written, and then I'm going to putter about in the garden after that and see how things go.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you will write that book. I'm sure you will. And I'll read it, and hopefully I'm still around, and I'll get you on the podcast to chat about it.
Outstanding. Yeah. Well, we may live next door to each other by then, since I've got my UK passport.
That's true, absolutely. That's right. Maybe I could have you across a table or something as we do this chat rather.
Right.
Or who knows what the world will be like? Of course, we have no clue what it'll be like in 5 years' time. Yeah. Goodness me, things are changing so quickly.
I know.
Anyway, I think we've probably covered quite a bit of the business cycle.
Right.
And I was thinking maybe we would go on to have a wee chat about inflation. Now, in your book, again, there's quite a lot which is new to me when I was reading it. And again, you'll explain these things. I'm aware, of course, that often when we talk about inflation, it's just like one big topic. It's like we talk, and there's these big models and big ideas about how things work and what the solutions are and all that kind of stuff. But what's unique about your approach is that you looked at it sectorally. The word is sector.
Right. Sectorally,
sectorally.
Yeah.
And you've said a lot of good things about that, and you've given lots of examples, which is probably the first thing maybe you should talk about, is just say about that particular approach.
Right.
In the book.
Let me say first, actually, that chapter was that section of that chapter, but most of that third chapter is the inflation stuff, because as I explained at the outset of that chapter, I said it is so poorly misunderstood that I feel an obligation to let's just start from scratch and build back up to an explanation of inflation here. And Melanie, my wife, has been my representative, educated layperson, and I have forced her to read many of these chapters. And I want to apologize to her publicly here on how bad this chapter was the first several runs through. I tried several different ways to make sense of everything. And I eventually went to the sort of narrative thing that you're referencing right now, where I went through a number of examples. And that seemed to me to be the only way to get the idea across. So you said we talk about it as if it's one number. And that's absolutely right. And it's not, it's never. I mean, anytime you look, and I don't know where to look for the data in the UK, but in the US, it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. At least it was before Trump destroyed everything. And you can look at the inflation numbers in various different sectors. And you will inevitably see that some of those sectors' prices are rising faster than the average, and we just treat the number as the average. And some of those are rising more slowly than the average, and some of them are falling. All right. So the real story to inflation isn't in that one number; it's in the breakdown. Because I teach my students. I teach a class on how to interpret economic statistics and then how to communicate this to non-economists. I said, you've got to break it down and figure out what's really causing it. Which sector is it going on in? And then so that's your first step. That's your first step in understanding inflation. The second step is that, okay, well I'm sorry, I should say, identify where it is, now why? And so in February or March of, what year was it now? 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine? I can't remember anymore. Yeah, it was after COVID, but yeah. I think it's 2022. But if you look at inflation figures then, you're going to see the numbers for energy and food skyrocketing. Like, okay, gosh, I wonder what caused that. Well, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and this is a massive, or more recently, the Straits of Hormuz being shut down, we know what caused it. All right, so now you got to ask yourself, okay, well, who's gaining and who's losing? Because everyone doesn't lose in inflation. It was explained from some of the things I read early on in my career from institutionalist and post-Keynesian authors, that inflation, think first of a redistribution of income, that sometimes it's an open fight between different sectors over how much income they get. This is particularly back in the days when unions were actually strong. That can be inflationary if we have to pay the workers at the automotive factories more. But what caused that inflation? Well, they wanted a bigger share. So in the 1973 Arab oil embargo, if you look at the actual breakdown of the numbers there, man, if I was in the oil industry, this was a great period for me. Mm-hmm. Am I paying more at the grocery store? Yeah, but my salary rose much more than the increase in prices at the grocery store. When I was an undergraduate from 1979 to 1983, everybody was majoring in geology, because they all wanted to go off to this great sector that was doing so well and move to where I live now in Texas. And then a number of things happened to cause the prices to come down. I'll cover that in a minute. So anyway, who's winning and who's losing is the next question. And then, are we okay with that? Because sometimes we're okay with it. I mean, for example, right after COVID happened and back when we really didn't know what was causing it, do you remember back when it was really hard to find alcohol, rubbing alcohol anywhere, because people were cleaning surfaces? In all my classrooms, there were those wipes that you could use to clear off, that you clean the tables. Well, it turns out that's not how it was being transmitted, but we didn't know that yet. So the prices I happened to buy a 3D printer then, and you need alcohol to clean the parts. Yeah. Man, I couldn't find it anywhere, and it was so expensive. All right. Now, should the government step in and help us produce more of that? Sure. But think about what the market is doing in the meantime. Because I'm not totally anti-market. The market is simply a tool. And for some jobs, it can do a pretty decent job. For others, it doesn't. So it made the production of alcohol more profitable. There were actually liquor companies that stopped making as much liquor and started shifting over to just making the alcohol that you can use to clean surfaces and that. So they're getting wealthier after COVID because of this. Am I okay with that? Yeah, I am, because what the consumer wants is more, medical alcohol, I guess what you would call it. What is the higher price in that sector doing? It's causing entrepreneurs to make more of that. Okay, now again, we may argue that, well, but that's not enough and we should subsidize and so forth. Great, but there's nothing inherently bad, quote unquote, about what's going on. On the other hand, during the 1973 OPEC oil embargo, without getting too political, are you okay with the OPEC countries getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier at your expense? Are you okay with Exxon and British Petroleum and so forth getting wealthier No, it's not really serving a social purpose at this point. So you just got to break it down to, okay, am I okay with it? All right. I'm not okay with the 1973 oil embargo. So now what do you do about it? And sometimes the answer is nothing. But in that case, you want to find alternate sources of energy. You want to find, and there's always a role, by the way, for the really poor and the retired who are on fixed incomes to help them in particular. Because the rest of us, who are still working, have the opportunity to get a higher raise next year. They may not. That's always a possibility. So what did actually happen to stop those prices going up from 1973 to about 1983 or so? Three things. One was firms learned how to substitute away from oil as much. Apparently, the petrochemical industry is heavily dependent, which I guess is why petro is at the beginning of it, on oil. Second thing was, this is when we decided it's worth looking at the North Sea oil. Because before it was too expensive to bother, but now it's not too expensive to bother. So all of a sudden we're discovering, well, not just discovering, but exploiting more oil. And again, obviously we have a climate issue here, but that aside for a moment. And third was OPEC collapsed. Iraq invaded Iran in, I think, 1979. I can't remember right now. You remember the Iranian Revolution. The Iraqis, Saddam Hussein assumed that they would just walk in and take over the parts of Iran that they wanted. Instead, it was like the movie Independence Day, where everyone came together against the foreign invader. So it actually, the Iranians came. So again, I love military history, so that was more than you needed. But what happened was, at first it drove up oil prices, of course, the invasion. But then as this war goes on and on, and it wasn't the quick win that which sounds like a familiar story, wasn't the quick win that Hussein was expecting. They start cheating on the quotas. Iran and Iraq had been given quotas. You can only sell this much oil. That's how we're keeping the price up. Well, they need the money. They're in the middle of a big war. They start cheating. Everyone else is like, well, why am I holding up the price for them? I'm going to sell as much as I want. And not only did oil prices stop increasing as quickly, they actually fell. Right. So those are the things that did happen. Could we have encouraged, the U.S. in particular is very reluctant to do any industrial policy. Could we have done something else? Yes. Now, before I leave that, one thing that is never the right solution, ever, when you go through those questions, is raising interest rates. Yeah. That does nothing. It treats a symptom. I mean, imagine, and we raised interest rates in the U.S. to horrific levels in I guess 1980, 79, 80. I can't remember now. It's in the book. It's during the Volcker recession under Paul Volcker. Now it does treat the symptom, because if the shortage of oil has driven up the price, then I can lower the price by making sure everyone's so poor they can't afford to buy it. And that's what the raising the interest rates does. But it's just treating a symptom. We're actually worse off than we were before. We caused, what at that point was the worst recession since the Great Depression. We caused it on purpose. Anyway, I'll shut up there and see.
I mean, as I've said before we come on, there's a couple of things in that chapter that are kind of unique, yet very obvious, which is one, we all assume that inflation is all about we're all losing.
Right.
What you demonstrate in the book is that there are winners and there are losers. Some people are better off.
Sometimes we're okay with the winners.
Sometimes we're okay. Sometimes we're okay because the market. And the other thing you mentioned is that sometimes that the demand-led inflation, all that is the market bidding up the price so that more of that thing that people want gets made, which cannot be a bad thing. Right. So inflation is not always a bad thing because it indicates something about what's required in the economy. So that's interesting.
And let me say, go ahead. I was going to let me say something controversial in a moment, but go ahead. Sorry. I interrupted you there.
No, that's okay. That's okay. No, so there was just a couple of things there that when I was reading it, I thought, well, that's interesting because some new things here that you won't find other people writing about. The winners and losers thing is nobody's saying that. Inflation's not always a bad thing. Nobody's saying that. Inflation is a signal that which it's the damn market. You're telling us all about how great the market is on the one hand, somewhere else, But when it comes to
Right.
inflation, somehow the market's not. It's not good. Well, of
Right,
course,
right.
it's just an indicator of something.
Yeah,
You know,
and it's very anti-labor,
yeah,
the existing policy, because they get all upset when the economy is doing well. Oh, there might be inflation now. So what?
yeah,
The kind of inflation that's caused by the economy expanding is the kind we like,
yeah,
the kind that creates signals to entrepreneurs. Now, again, you need to worry about people on fixed incomes. You need to worry about the poor. Income distributions here are very important, and something that's addressed later in the book. But for the most part, what do we really have? You know, and Pavlina Tchernova writes about this a lot. You know, we have a policy that allows us to beat labor back down. That every time the economy is expanding and we might have to pay them more, we need to throw the economy into recession.
yeah, yeah.
The controversial thing I want to say, and I'm not sure I want to say this out loud, but so there's a lot of MMT supporters who argue that there will never be any inflation from this, that there might be an initial jump of prices, because if we're going to pay people that work at fast food restaurants a decent wage, they're going to have to charge more for a Big Mac. So I have never been somebody that has argued that there will never be any inflation from MMT, because I don't care. To me, the kind of inflation that would result from MMT would be demand pull.
Yeah.
That consumers are well off now and buying a lot of stuff, so it might not. I mean, maybe. I just don't care. But
Yeah.
if you're an MMT supporter talking to somebody that you're trying to convince or whatever, that's not a good thing to say, because they're terrified.
I can relate to what you're saying there, because I mean I read that bit in the book, and I remember thinking about it because as somebody who's sort of deeply into MMT, what I've written about myself and what other people are reading about in relation to and we're kind of drifting onto the job guarantee here, is that the job guarantee is actually a way to manage inflation. So that's the kind of story, and that comes from Bill Mitchell mostly,
Right.
And some of that's to do with reducing competition for workers, and reducing competition, which pushes up prices, and that in itself causes inflation. So he's got an elaborate story about why the job guarantee actually stabilizes prices. You know, I'm sure
It could. I just don't care. Because I guess I lean towards the side of, oops, we stimulated too much. Oh well. I mean,
I mean, I don't talk.
But
I'm not trying. I always try not to talk about these things as absolute beliefs that MMTers have, or absolute beliefs that post-Keynesians have. We really just have to look at the facts. And I've said that in some of my articles in the past about UBI versus job creation, because I've written about that, and about how there's an automatic MMTers automatically jump in with a story about that. UBI, it's a waste of time, it's inflationary, blah blah blah. And because I mean, granted, there's never been UBI, right? There's only ever been small projects. But when I was writing about it, what I discovered is there was an awful lot of positive things had come out of these small projects. So when I wrote about that, I got folks saying, "Well, this idea, Jim, you seem to be very positive on this UBI thing, Jim, which is very unusual," and we don't agree with that.
Yeah.
So you've just got to look at the evidence, which is
you bring up something. That has worried me, and this is going to be true of any school of thought. But there are those who treat it as gospel. But Warren said this. But Stephanie said that. I said, well, okay, but what's the logic? I mean, I've said stuff that's wrong. I used to teach way back when I taught this that during economic expansions we should try to pay down the national debt, because that's what I had learned, and it seemed to make sense to me. And it wasn't until later, and so I have an article coming out at the Journal of Economic Issues, I think in September, that I co-authored with a professor in communications who really understands rhetoric and so forth. And it's about the rise of MMT. What was done right, what was done wrong, and where should we go from here? If you read that, you've got Randy Ray saying, that back on the post-Keynesian thought list, which I was on and saw this happening, but I didn't notice this in particular. But he was like, wait a minute, this guy Warren Mosler No, but that can't be right. But wait, no, maybe it is. And so, all of us have said things that are wrong. So just because somebody said it doesn't mean, there's that famous quote from Keynes, when I find out I'm wrong, I change my mind. What do you do? And so I very much appreciate what you're saying about that.
Yeah.
And by the way, the thing that we end with in this article is what needs to be done from here.
Yeah.
It strikes me that our biggest obstacle is still mainstream economics. I just was contacted by somebody who's working on Scottish independence. You probably know the guy. And he had used my exchange rate model to sort of forecast several outcomes. And when I emailed him back, I was like, our biggest problem is going to be mainstream economics is going to jump all over us for these ideas. And that's going to affect people's psychological view of the possibility of Scottish independence. So we have got to find some way. Well, there's no point in talking with them, we have discovered, and not surprisingly. But I guess we got to find a way to discredit and to have people sitting at home watching a podcast or a news story, hearing a so-called talking head on economics, and have them say to themselves, "Yeah, I'm not sure that's right." Whereas right now they don't know not to say that. I'm hoping this will help a little bit, the book, with people having a different, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Because, again, I think about what if mainstream economics were MMT? Then they would be dealing with, when smoking and tobacco was being attacked by the medical community as being dangerous, they were united in this, the medical community, and their pressure brought about regulation and reduction in smoking and so forth. What if mainstream economics is like that? But they're not. So we got to find a way to discredit them. Anyway, that's
in relation to that. I mean, I probably agree. I don't know whether you agree with me or not, but I tend to say that it's a waste of time talking to politicians. It's a waste of time talking to economists. The only people you can talk to are the voters who can vote them out. And that's a controversial thing, because as you know, there's people in MMT would hear me saying that and would get upset because they think, well, I won't say it because you know who I'm talking about, but there's some issues there. But I genuinely think you have to teach the population, I don't know how, it seems impossible, but you've got to change the culture. You've got to change the views that people have about what politicians and economists are saying about how things work, when clearly they're not working, and they know that. See, the thing, people thinking they've got it in the back of their head. Whatever they've done, it just hasn't been working. So they're much more receptive, I think, than most people think. The general public are receptive to somebody comes along and seems to be offering some kind of solution. The right wing have discovered that, and they always rediscover it, and they're very good at exploiting it. The progressive side of politics have never, they may be aware of it, but they've never taken advantage of it.
Randy Ray has written a lot about that. That we need to have these stories, simple stories, like the right wing does.
Exactly. So, if somebody like the Green leader, the English and Welsh Green Party is headed up by, I can't remember his name, but he's learned a bit about MMT, and he's talking about it in the media. And of course, he's getting pelters. You would expect that. It's they're out there to undermine him, but he's getting support because he's saying things that are resonating with people. So the people, the number of people or the percentage of people that's supporting the Green Party has risen. Now, that just tells me that if you say something which resonates and seems to be offering solutions, you're going to change people's minds. I spoke to somebody.
That's absolutely right. I also think that each one of us, you and me included, have our own particular rhetorical strengths and weaknesses, and that we should go ahead and attack from a variety of directions at once. Some people reach out to politicians. Some people maybe still try to communicate with some mainstream economists. Some people go straight to the people. And then, again, my military history background, I was told, I read once that the Soviet Army's philosophy for World War III was that you attack everywhere at once with a reserve and see where you're making the most progress. And then you pour your reserves into that spot.
Yeah.
So we attack a bunch of places, see where we're making the progress, and then double down on that. So
that's right. No, it's interesting.
It's also dynamic.
When you say that to me, of course, I realised that I was talking about a politician that understands MMT. And I had said earlier that we shouldn't be talking to politicians. So clearly there are some weaknesses in my argument, but that doesn't mean to say that makes my approach invalid.
Well, as a matter of fact, you did link it to, then there were more supporters of the Green Party.
Exactly.
Which is what you were ultimately after. So,
exactly.
So.
Okay, to get back to your book, I mean, there's clearly the whole big chapter on the job guarantee, and there's lots of stuff in there, and lots of stuff in there about whether it's affordable and all that kind of stuff. And there's a big chunk of stuff in the book about the myths about funding it. And we had, I remember I said to you right at the start about inflation, that it'd be quite interesting to talk about Friedman's ideas of the money supply. So I don't know whether you want to go back to that, or if I've worn that out, the inflation thing, or if you want to just go straight to let's talk about
let's do the Friedman thing real quick because it's fun. Because I had to read it in graduate school, and the basic argument is that if you increase the money supply, if the economy is already at full employment, then all that does is cause prices to be bid up. There are so many problems with this. All right. The article I had to read, I don't know if you've ever heard people talk about helicopter money and so forth. It comes straight from him. He had an article, again, that I had to read in graduate school, which is why I was depressed, because I was like, this is it? He said, he uses an analogy. I love analogies. I got no problem with the analogy. Right? So, but he says, let's say there's an island where everyone's already at full employment. Okay, well, first of all, then we don't need any policy anymore if we're already at full employment. All right, to me, the problem is we're not at full employment. But okay, we'll go with that so far, Friedman, because there's other problems. He says that, and then let's say that the way they distribute money is they fly a helicopter over and they drop it out. Right? That's how the monetary policy works. That's not monetary policy. That's fiscal policy. That's increasing people's incomes. Monetary policy, I argue somewhere, maybe in the book, I can't remember, would mean that the pilot would have to sneak into your home and then take $100 worth of bonds and trade it for $100 worth of dollars. All right. So you're no wealthier than you were when you started. Monetary policy does not make you wealthier. It changes the form of your wealth. All right. So there's one huge problem already, is that he has described fiscal policy. I have mentioned this to neoclassical colleagues, and they're like, oh, yeah. But and no offense to them, I didn't think of it either. When I first learned it.
No, when I read that in your book, I thought, that's so damn obvious. Why?
I never saw it before. The other problem is that the way this is described in the theory is that the helicopter has created an excess supply of money, by which they mean people already had as much cash as they wanted and they didn't want any more. The government forced more on them and they went out and spent it. Now, let's go back to, let's make this the proper example where the helicopter pilot sneaks into your house and trades assets, gives you cash for your, because that's the way monetary policy really works. But you can't do that in real life. You can't, unless I want to sell my treasury bill to you for your brand new cash. You can't make me take your brand new cash. It is impossible. And I can't remember where I read this. It might have been Basil Moore, really well-known post-Keynesian economist, did a lot of monetary policy stuff. But he said, money is like a haircut. You can't create an excess supply of haircuts. There must be a simultaneous and voluntary demand for a haircut in order to create one. I've used the example in class, you're a barber and there's going to be a big holiday weekend coming up. And you're thinking, I should make some extra haircuts right now to beat the rush. Well, you can't do that. It's impossible. All right? Yeah. But if you're a baker, you can make, I'm going to make some extra cupcakes for the big rush that's going to take place. Okay, you can do that. But money only exists when it's in your portfolio of assets, and that can only happen voluntarily. So I had this discussion back when I was very active on my Forbes blog, with a monetarist who had been educated at University of Chicago, where Friedman was. And I had written a piece saying pretty much what I just said. And he said, it was very pleasant conversation. He said, but it must be possible to create an excess supply of money or there would never be inflation. And I said, okay, how do you do it? How do you force someone to take brand new money to create this excess supply of money? Well, it's like when you put logs in a fireplace. I said, no, no, no. I love analogies as much as the next person. But now I want you to link the analogy to the real world phenomenon. Well, it's like when you plant trees in an orchard. I swear, I block copied it all and saved it so I would not think that I just imagined that this really happened. So he could not give me. I said, I just want to know this. Presumably, this is a very basic question for you jokers in your school of thought, which I didn't say. I was polite. That what is the specific mechanism? Well, we must agree to disagree was the final exchange. So he had no explanation whatsoever. So that's the Friedman stuff. It is, and I mentioned earlier today that Friedman also had this kind of methodological approach where it says it doesn't matter how realistic the model is as long as it predicts well, which I started college as a physics major. We did not say, well, let's say little fairies caused the atoms to do so-and-so. No, we tried to come up with what really happened. And guess what? That is the better way to do it because the real world is a perfect model of itself. And so whenever your model doesn't work, you have to ask yourself, what have I abstracted away from that was important, that I didn't think was? It's a very clever or duplicitous way of convincing people the government is bad. Anyway, that's the Friedman step.
No, I think there's an interesting point in there about what the real world, studying the real world. I mean, I don't know if you know, maybe you don't, but I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago. Interestingly enough, comparing MMT with post-Keynesian thought, and what was the same and what was different. And both of those schools, in a different ways, look at the real world. Which when I first came across MMT and when I first started writing about it and doing some kind of teaching, because I've got a course on it, I said at the time, well, actually, it's not about the understanding of currency issuing and currency using governments. It's about the methodology. The methodology is different from mainstream economics,
right,
and neoliberal, and that is why it's different. That is why we got to the point of understanding that there are currency issuing governments and currency using governments because the methodology is different.
And that's why it's so hard and that's why it's so hard to communicate. It's so hard to communicate with them because we're speaking two different languages.
That's right.
So
you're coming.
By the way, your picture has frozen up.
All right. Okay.
But I can hear you fine.
Must be.
So I assume everything's working okay. But
it's still working.
You're moving a bit now.
Right.
Well, I can hear you fine. No problem.
Maybe I'm deliberately kidding on that I'm frozen. Just as a joke. Perhaps not. No, it's all working fine here, but maybe my internet access.
Okay, good.
Or your internet access is not as good.
It says it's all. It says it's connected really well here, but it's just your picture freezes now and then. And it's a little bit fuzzy, but I can hear you fine. So if the main point of this is
I think it's okay
words,
because
then we're okay.
Both pictures are fine at my end.
Okay.
So do you want to talk a bit about the job guarantee? I mean, one of the things that kind of struck me was you talk about whether we can afford it or not, and you give some stories around that, which I thought was quite interesting. So maybe, I don't know if you want to start on that kind of idea.
Well, I wrote, that's the 5th chapter, the one after the history part, and I wrote it angry. And sometimes my best writing is angry. I was like, God, the solution is right there. The only thing that is stopping us is philosophy, not, or politics, not economics. The economics is there, it's clear. The private sector, the ultimate foundation of this is that the private sector, that capitalism is a tool. For some social problems, it's a very useful tool. And for others, for anything that's not profitable but socially beneficial, we need the government. All right. For example, climate change is not profitable to address. And yet it is the thing that is going to haunt us for the next at least century, if not longer. And so we need to find a way to address that. So, and the other thing that the private sector is not good at is labor is a cost to the private sector. So it doesn't try to maximize the use of labor. It tries to minimize the use of labor, which, okay, fine. All right. We've laid off workers at McDonald's to put in a little, kiosk. That's fine as long as we have something for them to do. Your establishment Democrats are like, well, small business is the key. No, 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 no. The private sector is doing all it wants to do right now. And it is presumably keeping prices low for us and producing output, assuming we have enough competition in the system. So there must be something for the person that got laid off at McDonald's to do, because we don't have less food. We didn't change that at all. We can just produce the food with fewer people. That's the job guarantee. That and there's some slightly different variations. Let's say you take a month on unemployment insurance to look for another job, can't find one. Okay, well then you just come to the same place where you're already signed up. And by the way, one of the wonderful things about this policy is we always know how big it needs to be. The unemployed self-identify. After the financial crisis, they had to guess, because they were simply going to indirectly stimulate the macroeconomy. They had to guess how much, and they way underestimated how much money they needed to spend to get the people reemployed. So that you go to them, and I love the way Pavlina Chernovic words this, I think it's in one of her books, is that in the private sector, you must meet their needs. In the public sector, well, what skills have you got? And if potentially there's something we can put you in right away, then we'll do that. And gosh, my skill set isn't really very good. Oh, well, then we'll train you. Because our country is better off with people who are, people want to work. Or listen, people want to contribute to society. We are social animals. We want to be recognized as upstanding members of the tribe. And so they want to do these things. So anyway, so I said, okay, how much are we going to pay them? Well, with that minimum wage over here, which is miserable. So I looked up the MIT webpage, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They maintain a living wage for every county in the United States, which is an interesting question. I don't know, exactly how we implement this. It does seem to me that the wage in New York City should be different than the wage in where my dad was born, in Cedarville, West Virginia. But I just picked my own county, Tarrant County in Texas. And the living wage, I think, was triple the minimum wage. And then I broke it down. I was like, okay, so how much does that give you for rent? How much does that give you for... It is not very generous. They were assuming $8 a day on food in this calculation. So it's not like, oh, we're just creating all these welfare queens or whatever. This is not very generous. But, all right, so I went with that dollar value. So that's what they call living wage. We'll go with that. I then said, well, let's also give them health care. Because if they got to pay for that on top of everything else, this is going to be very uneven. Maybe some people are older and need more health care. Some people are younger. Let's try to make it a little bit more fair, or a little bit more of an actual, what would you call it, net, a safety net. So we're going to provide everyone with health care. I looked up numbers on what it would cost to do that. And then some of these people have children. And, so what about child care? And I calculated how many unemployed people tend to have children and how much that would cost. I bundled all this together. I then said, okay, let's say we had this job program in place from 2000 to 2020, which covers two of the worst economic downturns in U.S. history since the Great Depression. It's going to be the financial crisis. It's going to be COVID. So this shouldn't work well, right? Now, even without taking into account the fact that we don't need to hire every unemployed person, because as we hire unemployed people, so that creates income that's going to stimulate the private sector. But let's make this as strict as possible. It turned out to be, I believe, 1/8. I don't remember the numbers anymore, but like 1/8 of the defense budget for zero unemployment. Not for 4%. That's not too bad, but something closer to zero. 1/4 of Social Security in the United States. Now, so already, even without taking into account the idea of the government being a currency issuer and so forth, even without that, this is a tiny cost for a magnificent outcome. We're now actually addressing climate change. We're now actually addressing elder care crisis, which is I'm about to contribute to it, the elder care crisis. And so, but then we have on top of that the fact that the government is a currency issuer, that the federal government is not limited in their ability to spend. And so then the chapter goes through, oh, will it be inflationary? Will the interest payments be too high? And on and on. And it discounts all of these. And then the chapter finishes off with what I opened with just a moment ago, and that is our problem is philosophical. It is not economic. We could solve this. And hopefully the young people of today who are more open to the idea of government intervention without calling everything socialism or without automatically assuming socialism is a bad thing, maybe we can get something like this going. But anyway, so that's kind of the rundown. I don't remember my numbers anymore. But,
no, I mean, I read them, but I didn't necessarily they didn't necessarily go in.
Yeah.
But
I wrote them, and I don't remember them. So yeah.
And I think one of the things that you said about in terms of the numbers was you compared it with the enormous amount of time that it took and money that it took to recover from the 2008 financial crash. Is that correct? Is that in my head, or was it an earlier?
That is absolutely exactly right. I compared it to the and it took 7 years to get back to the same level of unemployment as when the financial crisis started, which wasn't near zero. It was still around 4 something.
Yeah.
And so it took forever. It's like you want to fill a glass of water, and so you turn on your sprinkler in the front yard. Why don't we just go straight to the tap? We're trying to get these people employed again. And so what the current policies are, then we stimulate the entire macro economy to get those people employed back at McDonald's, when that wasn't our problem in the first place. Let McDonald's lay off workers. And directly help the unemployed.
There's a wee story. What's Phil's surname? He's an MMT guy. Can't remember anybody.
Armstrong?
We could go with that, because it's a story I want to say, which was this idea that it was talking about the same idea of like a monetary policy, changing interest rates, about how that's like trying to affect the economy. Similar to trying to drive a car when you're sitting in the back seat rather than the front seat with the steering wheel.
Right.
But you're sitting in the back seat and you're maybe using your weight to try and move the car round the corners and try and somehow make an impact and go somewhere. Whereas you could, of course, just grab the steering wheel, and that is the job creation.
Right.
Actually create jobs.
Right, exactly. That's great. And then the very last chapter is all the equations and stuff like that, if somebody wants to see the underlying, theories. Now, I will tell you a secret on your show that'll be an exclusive here. I actually wrote that first. And it was a series of business cycle theories. I'd written a paper on it. I'd sent it out to a couple of journals, and it had been rejected everywhere because it was too long.
Right, okay.
And I thought, well, geez, but I like it. And I want it written down somewhere, so I'll make it my last chapter. That's where that came from. Oh, well, it was a Scotsman, actually, that convinced me to not keep trying to publish that business cycle section that ends up being the appendix, and instead just write a whole book. It was our provost at the university, Noel Donovan, who, as I say, is Scottish. And I had turned in my report on my sabbatical, because I'd written this piece on my sabbatical. And he says, well, don't try to publish it. Make it a book. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So thanks to Noel Donovan, it's now a book.
Okay. I mean, it's just to sum up, because I've held you quite a long time, John.
That's fine.
Information. Yeah. So we should probably summarise and get to the point where we can say, cheerio, have a good evening, go and watch some more football. So thanks a lot.
That's right. We start soon.
As you know from the things I've been writing on Facebook or Substack or whatever, I love the book. I think it's an absolutely great book, and anybody
thank you.
And everybody should grab a copy if they can. I know it's on Amazon, and I'm sure it's on lots of other digital bookshops.
Is it? Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll let you go. I won't do any more talking. I'll just say cheerio, and we'll catch you soon. See you later. Bye.
Thank you again so much. Give our regards to Pat.
I will do, and give same to Melanie. Okay, thanks, John. It's always a pleasure to chat to you, and it's always an educational experience. I know what the next thing I'm going to say is going to be out of date within a few days, which is just to say, good luck to you on the World Cup. You're supporting England. You were born in England, so I give you my best wishes, despite the fact I'm from Scotland and we went out, tragically, as always. But I wish you good luck, and I'll catch you again, hopefully not too far in the future. Okay, I'll catch you later. Bye for now.